Beautiful, gorgeous, snowy day. Gotta go for a ride. Better plug in my phone. God, what's wrong? I can't get it into gear. I better post on the forums and figure out why I can't get... son of a bitch! Ever climb into your rig, go for a nice drive, and by the time you plug in all the devices the internet tells you need to have to be a real overlander, you realize that the inside of your truck looks more like a gas explosion disaster at a Best Buy? I have a solution for you. Today we're going to get into how I installed a pair of USB 3 quick charge ports in my 4Runner. This was a project I designed to facilitate cleaning up the inside of the cab, as well as provide an example to show people how to do layout and simple basic fabrication and kind of modification techniques I learned while working in the trades. Hope you enjoy. Once I've gone ahead and moved the head unit, which I chose to do because while you can install the ram mount ball just by pulling it away from the dashboard and just drilling your small hole, to install the power I got to cut a square hole, and that's something I really want to do precisely. The margins on the panel mount aren't that big really. I want it to be nice and exact, so that's something I'm actually going to take back into my bench and do inside. Okay, so we've finished installing the first of the flush mount panel for the USB, and the important, you see it's blue, and I verified that this is compatible with the latest fast charging. I've sighted it for where it won't interfere with any of the existing panel structures, and this cable can have a nice gentle radius to make it down to where I'm going to put the charging unit itself. Now it's just time to take it out to the shop and use some shop air, blow out all the little chaff, and that's good to go. The second plug is going to be installed inside the blank left by this guy here. Now this is going to require a bit more modification because of the way this is structured, but I'll walk you through how I did it. Cut off some of the unnecessary plastic for this housing. We got to figure out how we want to remove the internal structures that are going to prevent this from allowing the cable to pass through. You can see I've kept the button, the blank face, nice and clean with a little bit of tape, and that way once the unit goes in there, everything will look fine. Now, using a couple softwood shims, I've gone ahead and secured this in my vise. I've got the button blank secured in my vise. I've gone ahead and measured up the size I'm going to need to make my hole. By using my calipers as a set of dividers, I've gone ahead and found my centering point. Now on metal, I would glue this with some machinist glue, and then would go ahead and just use a scratch. And anybody tells you shouldn't do that, it's never worked in production. Next, go ahead and drill a pilot hole. I use step drills for pretty much everything. In this case, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to figure out the width, the narrowest width of the plug I'm trying to drill a hole for. Then I'm going to mark the corresponding step on my step drill with a little bit of Sharpie, and that way I'll know that when this black line gets eaten, I'm there. One thing to be careful about is that because this is going to get hot, you'll see that the hole can wander one way or the other. And in this case, because we're cutting it into a square or rectangle shape, that doesn't matter much, but we're going to have to account for that as we do the rest of our layout. Let's go ahead and remove the tape and see what it looks like. Nice and clean cut. Now, if we were going to stick with a round hole and it wasn't going to be a flange, you'd want to make sure you'd walk this edge back with some kind of deburring tool. But we're going to be expanding on this hole now, so that's fine. Time for a fresh piece of tape, and now we're going to do some more layout with a Sharpie. Working back off the center line that I've reestablished here, I've gone ahead and marked my cutout, and you can see that my general rule is I eat the line when I'm doing stuff like this in plastic. That way I tend to measure a little conservatively, keep everything a little tight, because I can always open stuff back up with a file, but put material back in is kind of a pain in the ass, especially because this stuff I have found plastic welders don't work great with these. You can take that remnant that I used when I cut off in the beginning, you can make that into a plastic welding rod and do some welding, but it's never going to look right. So it's easier just to cut small and open things up as you go. About 2 minutes later, and I've gone ahead and I've roughed that out, as well as using my RotoZip tool to remove all the substructure plastic that's also going to be in the way down there. Next, I'm going to use my calipers as kind of a divider head again, just to see if I'm, kind of on track with being pretty close to being square. And I'm pretty close. This is going to fit just fine. And once I open this back up again, I'll check again with the measurement. Now from here on in, I'm going to use files. And that's because the RotoZip tool removes a ton of material, which is great. But it's pretty easy. You can just go walk straight into the plastic. Time for a quick test fit. And we're getting there. Again, slowly walking ourselves up to the limit. And when I mean slowly, this whole thing is going to take me, 15 minutes to do. But if you just take your time and do it right the first time, you don't have to then go out to the junkyard find more of these, and that's a lot more time invested. So take your time, walk your way up to the size, and you'll be good in the first go. Well, I'd love to have shown you the shot of me putting this in. Did a bit more clearancing and tolerancing, and went to pop it in, seeing how much of those clips I'd have to remove, and it clicked in place. And you know what? I'm not going to take it back out, because those clips that retain this are really kind of a single-use item. And I'm sure that I can get in there with a pick probe and do it, but I'm not going to worry about it. You'll see that I've removed quite a bit of the body of this piece here. It used to extend out of there. I cut that off with a bandsaw. Then I found my center point, drilled through it with a centering bit, or just a pilot bit. Then use my step drill to open it up. Then a RotoZip tool and some files to finish it off. All told, less than 15 minutes worth of work. And the benefit of using a button blank like this, especially if you're new to working on your car, you're nervous about it, is it's an easily replaceable item. You go to a junkyard, you pick up 5 or 6 of them. Usually the guy won't even charge you for them, or maybe a buck a piece or something like that. And the nice thing is you can put something in that you're not sure if you're going to keep, and later on down the road, just pop it in a replacement. Any modification you make to your vehicle is going to lower your resale value, fact. And electrical work is really high on that, and anything you've done to modify the interior cabin, especially up front, that has a really extreme effect on your value, unless you're going to go private sale and find the right buyer. So whenever you can do something like this, use something that's easy to replace, easy to source. You're going to add a little complexity, because obviously this is harder to use because of the structures inside this button blank. But once you get the hang of it, it's pretty simple and straightforward. For rally cars and for race cars that we built that retained a lot of the stock dash, this was a very common method that we used when we didn't want to butcher the interior of the vehicle, especially when the owner might have as a mixed-use vehicle. So whenever you can hack apart a button blank, it's going to be a good skill to learn and something that's easy to test on. Go buy, get a couple from the junkyard, try it out, get the practice for it, even if you don't have necessarily something to do, even if you don't do this mod or another simple mod. But boy, is this a good skill to have, and will be transferable regardless. We're back inside, and you can see here's the completed install using the button blank that's been cut down. And it's pretty close for government work. If this was a customer car, I'd probably hack it apart, make a second one, or work a bit further on it. I was able to retain the locking clips for this, so I don't need to bed this in. But in the case that, if you find a case where you have to, and honestly it's as a function of tiny tolerances, what I would recommend doing is, once you've got it installed, just using a little bit of epoxy and bedding some epoxy in here and here on both sides, after scoring up the housing for the USB port, and that'll give a nice little bit of attachment. And again, these button blanks are so easy to find that you could kind of go to town. The world's your oyster. So I'm going to use a pick punch, clean up a few pieces of that chaff, probably tidy up that back edge because I'm OCD, and we'll go from there. For situations where we want to protect the warranty, it's always a good idea to hack into a factory harness as little as possible. So we're going to power this with a little fuse tap, and you're going to need a couple butt connectors, section of red wire. Don't be that dickhead who uses the wrong color wire, okay? Use the right color wire and have an appropriate gauge. And then, of course, the panel mount unit that we're actually going to install back in behind the dash. So now it's just a question of extending this so I can get it to the interior cabin fuse block, and we'll take it from there. Next, go ahead and shrink wrap all your ends. Then go ahead and slide the shrink tubing over your butt connector and give some heat to that as well. Next step is to find a fuse that's unused and is switched to high power. Next, it's all about fishing that wire through. Now, I've got a lot more work I want to do with this truck, so I'm not going to go crazy with tidying this up too far. Run the wire up, and I'm going to snake it under along the bottom of this fascia here. And then with the assistance of my kiddo, who's starting to feel better, I ran it between the white airbox plastic and the dash. If you're doing a panel mount, this is going to be visible. You would bring this all the way through, take off the locking ring, pass the wires through, install this from the front. But in this case, we're going to hide it down inside here because we're not going to have those ends be accessible. So I'm going to go ahead and find a location for that, throw a few zip ties in there to hold it in place, and start putting the dash back together. The next step is to go ahead and put the second USB power into the dash. So we're just going to feed this back. Once you've got your line flossed all the way through, go ahead and press it in. Your nice click. Now this is installed. For this next part, you can do it by yourself, but it's a lot easier if you've got a helper. I've gone ahead and installed the panel mount here, and the cable is going to go through the main opening for the head unit. It goes down underneath, and I've connected it to the power supply here. All these wires are messy right now. That's perfectly fine. That's not the point. All we're going to do now is go ahead and reinstall the head unit. The next part, having an assistant, is awfully nice because you have to balance the head unit on the shift knob, and you're going to scratch stuff up. There's plenty of raw exposed edges. Now just take your time and go ahead and plug in all the connectors. You'll see that everything is color coordinated and that only one cable fits in any one given spot. So it's pretty idiot proof. The one exception being that if you rush, you could theoretically break one of these terminations, then you'd have to go and buy one from Toyota or get the right part from a junkyard and depin it and repin it, and that's definitely a lot of work and involves a much more explicit skill set. So once you've gone ahead and plugged them all in, you're going to see that there's also the strain relief that goes here. There's one more plug here I'll need to do off camera. One that's super easy to forget because it's not really part of the main harness and hangs down here is this other antenna cable, and that goes up to the upper right hand corner here. Once I've gone ahead and reinstalled the head unit, next thing to do is decide your final location for the controller. I ultimately decided after some fiddling that I wanted to install the power converter right here. I'll back out so you can see what I'm talking about. To make it easier to get to, remove the two bolts that hold this in place. This one here, and just lean it away. That'll give you all the access you need. Make sure that you zip tie that bastard in, because if you don't, it's going to rattle and drive you crazy when you're out on the trail, especially on rough corrugations. Once you go ahead and get that lower unit reinstalled, it's time to reconnect your HVAC controls, not forgetting about the strain relief, and then pressing the HVAC control back into place. Next, go ahead and install the corner pieces. On some people's trucks, that'll come out as one single unit. I think that this center console has been taken apart enough times by the dealership that things aren't quite the same as they used to be. Now it's time for us to go ahead and reinstall our RAM mounts.